Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we unpack critical issues to give you the knowledge you need. Today, we're zeroing in on something pretty interesting in environmental protection. Emissions trading systems.
Right. ETS, as they're often called.
Exactly. Think of it as moving beyond the usual top-down rules. It's a market-based idea, potentially more flexible, and maybe, just maybe, more effective.
It's definitely a hot topic in policy circles.
And really relevant if you're tracking policy innovations, maybe for exams like the UPSC, for instance. You need to be across these kinds of solutions.
Absolutely. And the great thing today is we're not just talking theory. We've got a concrete example. The pioneering emissions market for particulate matter in Surat, India.
That's the focus. Our info comes mainly from the Indian Express, which covered a key study published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics.
A very well-regarded journal.
So our mission today, well, first we'll dig into Surat. How did this experiment actually work? What did it achieve?
Then we zoom out a bit.
Yeah, look at emissions trading schemes, ETS more generally. How do they function? What are the potential upsides? Downsides too, of course.
And critically, what does the Surat experience really teach us about whether these market tools can actually cut pollution effectively?
Okay, let's get into it. Surat first. What did that study find?
Well, the Quarterly Journal of Economics study looked at 162 textile plants in Surat over nearly 2 years.
Yeah.
And the key finding, a really significant drop in pollution. We're talking 20 to 30% reduction in particulate pollution among the plants participating in the ETS.
Wow, 20 to 30%? That's substantial.
It really is. And importantly, it was significantly better than plants still under the conventional regulation.
What was going wrong with the conventional ones?
Well, one major issue was compliance. The study noted that under the old system, non-compliance was happening nearly a third of the time.
A third of the time. Yikes.
Yeah.
So how did the ETS plants compare on compliance?
That's another striking part. The data showed that plants in the trading system, they held permits covering 99% of their emissions.
99%. That's almost perfect compliance.
It suggests the market mechanism really encouraged adherence. It wasn't just about avoiding fines, maybe.
Interesting. And we should stress how groundbreaking this Surat ETS actually was, shouldn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. It launched in 2019, and it was, believe it or not, the world's first market specifically for trading particulate emissions.
Or first anywhere.
Yep. And also India's first ETS for any kind of pollutant. It targeted 342 specific industries in Surat known for being heavy polluters.
Which ones mainly?
Mostly those using coal, lignite, diesel, the usual suspects for particulate matter.
And this wasn't just dreamt up overnight, right? There was collaboration involved.
Definitely. It was a big team effort, led by the Gujarat Pollution Control Board, the GPCB.
Okay, the state regulator.
Right. But they worked very closely with top researchers, folks from JPAL, EPIC at University of Chicago, and Yale University.
So a mix of regulatory know-how and academic rigor.
Yeah.
Probably key to its design.
Very likely. That partnership was probably crucial for its, apparent early success.
So, summing up Surat, better compliance, real emission cuts, and it seems like it was more cost-effective, transparent, and flexible for that industrial cluster. Okay, now let's break down how these ETS things actually work, this cap-and-trade model. What's the core idea?
Okay, so at its simplest, regulators first set a limit, a cap.
Like a budget, a pollution budget for the whole area.
Sort of, yeah. A total ceiling on how much of a specific pollutant, say particulate matter, can be emitted overall by everyone covered.
Got it. The cap, then what?
Then industries get permits. Sometimes they're given out, sometimes auctioned. Each permit allows them to emit a certain amount, like 1 ton of CO2 or 1 kilogram of particulate.
Okay, so permits are like permission slips to pollute up to your limit.
Exactly. And here's the trade part. Let's say a factory installs new filters or switches fuel and cuts its emissions below what its permits allow.
Ah, so they have leftover permits.
Precisely. They have surplus permits, and they can then sell those permits to another company, maybe one that's finding it harder or more expensive to cut its own pollution that quickly.
I see. So there's a direct financial reward for cleaning up your act more than required.
That's the key incentive. It makes reducing pollution potentially profitable, not just a cost.
That sounds like a win-win, potentially. Gives struggling companies some breathing room while rewarding the efficient ones.
That's the theory. Flexibility is a major selling point. If you're a plant with, say, older equipment or fewer resources, you can buy permits. It buys you time.
Time to invest and catch up.
Right. While the plant that's already efficient or innovates quickly gets a new revenue stream selling its extras.
But markets can be volatile. How do regulators stop the permit price from going crazy high or collapsing so low that it's meaningless? And how do they make sure companies actually follow the rules?
Good questions. Regulators usually set a price floor, a minimum price for permits.
To keep the incentive alive.
Exactly. So it's always worth something to reduce emissions. And often a price ceiling, too, a maximum price.
To prevent runaway costs for businesses.
Correct. Keeps it predictable somewhat.
Yeah.
And for compliance, well, if you emit more than you have permits for,
Uh-oh.
yeah, there are penalties, big fines usually, or you might have to buy and surrender even more permits later. It has teeth.
Okay, so there are consequences. And the long game here isn't just shuffling permits around, is it? What's the ultimate goal?
No, the real goal is to reduce overall pollution over time.
Ow.
The regulators gradually reduce the total number of permits available in the system. Each year, or every few years, the overall cap gets tighter.
Ah, so the pollution budget shrinks.
Right. Which means permits become scarcer, likely more expensive. That constantly pushes all companies to find cheaper ways to cut emissions, to invest in cleaner technology.
Okay, that makes sense in theory. But, we've heard criticisms about ETS schemes elsewhere in the world. It hasn't always been smooth sailing, has it?
Definitely not. It's crucial to look at the challenges. Surat looks promising now, but we need to learn from other places. One big issue has been getting the initial cap right.
Cows so.
Sometimes regulators have issued too many permits at the start, maybe due to political pressure or just uncertainty.
And if there are too many permits?
The price crashes. If permits are dirt cheap, there's very little financial reason to invest serious money in cutting pollution. The whole incentive structure gets weakened. There have been reports, like from Le Monde about the European ETS, suggesting surplus permits kind of dampened its impact for a while.
So setting that initial cap is absolutely critical. What other pitfalls are there?
Well, regulatory oversight is another one. You need really strong monitoring, reporting, and verification, MRV.
To make sure the emissions data is accurate.
Exactly. Without transparency and good data, how do you know if the system is actually working? Is pollution really going down? It's hard to tell. Weak oversight can undermine the whole thing.
And I imagine industry lobbying plays a role sometimes.
Oh, for sure. That's a huge factor. In some places, powerful industries, especially fossil fuel companies in the U.S., for example, have lobbied hard.
To do what? Water it down?
Pretty much. Lobbying to delay the tightening of those caps or to get lots of permits for free instead of having to buy them. If too many permits are handed out free, it can look less like an environmental tool and more like a pay-to-pollute scheme, critics would say.
Right, undermining the polluter pays principle. Are there issues with how the targets themselves are set? I think you mentioned China's system earlier.
Yes, that's another design choice that matters.
Yeah.
China's national carbon market, which is massive, mostly uses emissions intensity targets, meaning emissions per unit of output. So a steel mill might have a target for emissions per ton of steel produced.
Okay. What's the problem with that?
The worry is, even if the mill gets more efficient and reduces emissions per ton, if it massively increases its total steel production, its overall emissions could still go up. An absolute cap on total emissions provides more certainty about the environmental outcome.
I see. Efficiency gains might be canceled out by sheer volume increase. And then there's the fairness question, environmental justice. Does ETS raise concerns there?
Yes, unfortunately it does. There was a significant study published in PLOS Medicine back in 2018 looking at California's ETS.
What did it find?
It found that many of the regulated factories were located in communities already facing disadvantages, often low-income areas or communities of color. And quite worryingly, the study indicated that between 2011 and 2015, local air pollution emissions actually increased in some of these areas near the regulated plants.
Increased, even with the ETS?
Yes. It raised serious questions about whether the system, while maybe reducing overall emissions statewide, was unintentionally shifting the pollution burden onto already vulnerable communities. Equity is a huge consideration.
These are really serious points, especially thinking about India, with such diverse regions and industries. So let's bring it back home. Why is ETS even being considered so seriously in India, given the existing environmental rules? What's wrong with the traditional command and control system?
Well, the current system in India is largely, as you say, command and control. The Environment Ministry, the Central Pollution Control Board, CPCB, the state boards, SPCBs, they set standards.
And enforce them how?
Through things like fines, sometimes ordering plant closures. It's very top-down. And as we saw from the control group in the Surat study, noncompliance can be a real persistent problem.
And it's often quite rigid, isn't it? The same rule applies to everyone.
Exactly. Uniform standards often apply whether you're a massive industrial plant or a much smaller unit.
Which probably hits the smaller guys harder.
It can, yes. Larger companies might have the resources to comply or even, frankly, navigate the system better. Plus, actually monitoring and enforcing these rules across thousands of industries nationwide, that's a massive challenge.
Resource constraints.
Manpower.
All of the above. Limited staff, limited budgets for the pollution control boards. It can lead to patchy enforcement, delays, and often means the regulators are reacting to problems rather than preventing them. Okay, so given those challenges with the traditional approach, how does something like the Surat ETS offer a potential improvement in the Indian context?
The big difference is that flexibility we talked about.
Right, the trading.
Yeah. Instead of one rigid rule, companies can choose, reduce emissions themselves, or buy permits if that's cheaper or necessary in the short term. It allows them to figure out the most cost-effective way for them.
And it shifts the focus from just penalties
to financial incentives. There's a positive reward for doing better, not just punishment for doing worse. That can be a powerful driver.
It sounds like it could help those smaller industries too, the ones struggling with the uniform standards.
Potentially, yes. It offers a pathway. They might initially buy permits, giving them time to find the capital for upgrades, rather than facing immediate closure threats. It allows for a more customized compliance journey.
So the hope is a shift from pure enforcement battles to something more market-driven, maybe more efficient.
That's the potential, yes. Leveraging market forces could, in theory, lead to more efficient pollution reduction and maybe even better accountability if the monitoring is strong.
Okay, so pulling it all together, the Surat experiment definitely gives us some encouraging real-world data for using markets against particulate pollution.
Yeah.
Seems promising.
It does offer a positive signal, but as our discussion on global experiences shows, it's not a magic bullet.
Absolutely. We have to be realistic.
Exactly. Learning from those challenges faced elsewhere, the permit allocation pitfalls, the need for rock-solid oversight, the lobbying risks, the design details like absolute caps, and critically, the environmental justice dimension, all of that is essential.
Especially if thinking about applying this more widely in India.
Precisely. Designing an ETS that's both effective and equitable in India's incredibly diverse context, that requires careful thought based on these global lessons.
This has been a really useful deep dive. Understanding ETS, the Surat case, the pros, the cons. It's vital stuff, particularly, as we mentioned, if you're preparing for exams like UPSC or just tracking key policy debates. So here's a final thought for you, our listener. Considering everything we've discussed, India's varied industries, its regulatory environment, what do you think are the absolute must-haves, key factors to get right, if India were to try and scale up the Surat model? Say, to other regions or for different pollutants like CO2?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I'd say, first off, you absolutely need robust, transparent, verifiable monitoring systems. Technology like continuous emissions monitoring systems, CEMS, is key.
Got to trust the data.
You do.
Yeah.
Second, you need strong, independent regulators who can set appropriate caps and resist undue influence. Third, those caps need to be scientifically sound and genuinely ambitious enough to drive reductions.
Not just token gestures.
Right. And fourth, crucially, mechanisms to safeguard against creating pollution hotspots or worsening inequalities, maybe revenue recycling or targeted investments in vulnerable areas. And finally, you can't just copy-paste. The design needs tailoring for different sectors, different pollutants, different regional contexts.
Lots to consider there. Essential points for making this work on a larger scale. Thank you so much for breaking all that down for us.
My pleasure.
And a big thank you to you, our listener, for tuning in to the deep dive. We hope this exploration of emissions trading, powered by insights from the Indian Express on the Surat study, was valuable. If it helped clarify things, especially for your UPSC prep or general awareness, do give us a like and subscribe for more deep dives into critical topics.
And please leave your comments, any further questions, or other topics you'd like us to tackle. Let us know.
We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for joining us.